A Welsh roofer named Gareth Pugh climbed onto a wind-battered farmhouse near the Brecon Beacons. He had $18 worth of curved sheet metal in his hands, a hand drill, and an idea that the energy industry has spent the last 67 years trying to make you forget. By the next morning, in winds barely strong enough to ruffle a newspaper, that strip of bent metal was spinning a small dynamo fast enough to light 2 filament bulbs in the farmhouse kitchen. Not a prototype, not a theory. Lights. On. From wind. From a roof. Pugh wrote a short note about it in a regional builder's circular that year. Then the note vanished. The design vanished. And for the next half-century, every homeowner in Britain and America was told the same story. If you want wind power, you need a tower. You need an engineer. You need permits. You need somewhere between $12,000 and $30,000. Here is what they never told you. The single most wind-rich piece of real estate you own is not your backyard. It's not a field. It's not a hilltop. It is the ridge of your roof. And right now, while your electricity bill sits on the kitchen table, that ridge is spinning uselessly in the breeze. Free energy. Passing overhead. Every single day. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why that is happening, who benefits from it, and how to stop it for somewhere between $78 and $94. Not $1,000. Not $10,000. $78 to $94 in one afternoon of your time. If your electricity bill has climbed every year for the last decade, if you have looked at solar panels and felt that quiet sick feeling when you see the price tag, if you have ever stood in your yard on a windy day and thought there has to be a better way, then stay with me. Because what I am about to show you was never supposed to reach you. It was written out of every homeowner's guide, every renewable energy brochure, every government incentive database. Not by accident, by design. I'm going to give you the physics first, because the physics is the only thing they cannot argue with. Then I'll give you the history, because the history is what makes you understand why this was buried. And then I'll give you the blueprint. Step by step. Material by material. Dollar by dollar. Let's start at the ridge. When wind hits the wall of a house, it does not stop. It does not go around. It climbs. The slope of a standard pitched roof, anywhere between a 4 and 12 and a 9 and 12 pitch, behaves exactly like an airplane wing. The air rushing up the windward face has to travel a longer path than the air moving in open space beside it. And because air is a fluid, it speeds up to compensate. By the time that air reaches the ridge, it is moving somewhere between 30 and 80% faster than the ambient wind speed measured 10 feet off the ground. That is not a theory. That is measured data. The Building Research Establishment in Watford, England published a wind load study in 2009. Their instruments confirmed what roofers and farmers had suspected for generations. Ridgeline wind speeds were dramatically higher than ground-level readings. Then the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado ran their own measurements between 2011 and 2013. Their report, Technical Document TP 500-56448, concluded that ridgeline wind speeds on standard suburban homes exceeded backyard pole-mounted readings by an average of 46%. 46%. Now sit with that number for a moment. Because wind power does not scale linearly with wind speed. It scales with the cube of velocity. A 46% increase in wind speed translates to roughly a 312% increase in available power. 312% more power. Sitting on the peak of your roof. Right now. Going nowhere. Let me make this concrete. A standard 400-watt residential solar panel covers roughly 20 square feet of roof. Across the continental United States, accounting for cloud cover, panel degradation, dust, and shading, that panel produces an average of 1.6 kilowatt-hours per day. That is the real number from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory's 2022 Tracking the Sun report. Not the marketing number. The real one. A ridge-mounted turbine occupying the same 20 linear feet of roof peak in an area with average annual wind speeds of just 9 miles per hour produces between 3.5 and 5.1 kilowatt-hours per day. 9 miles per hour. That is the average annual wind speed across most of the Midwest, the Great Plains, the entire Northeast, and most coastal regions. The place you most likely live. 3.5 to 5.1 kilowatt-hours versus 1.6. That is the 220% figure you saw in the title. And it is not marketing math. It is cubic wind scaling applied to ridgeline acceleration. The physics is not complicated. The suppression of that physics is. Engineers call what happens at your roof peak the Venturi effect combined with boundary layer acceleration. When wind approaches a sloped roof, it does not just rise. It compresses. Air molecules pile up against the windward face, and because air behaves like any fluid, it speeds up as it is forced through a narrowing channel. In this case, the channel between the rising air and the invisible boundary layer above the roof surface. By the time that air reaches the ridge, it is moving at speeds substantially higher than the free stream wind anywhere around it. A turbine mounted on that peak sits in what is essentially a permanent natural wind tunnel. It does not need a tall tower because the roof is the tower. It does not need massive blades because the air it catches is already pre-accelerated. And it does not need high ambient wind speeds because the physics of the ridge turns moderate wind into usable energy that a backyard pole turbine could never match. In 2006, a small British company called the Power Collective filed a patent for a device they called the Ridge Blade. In essence, it was Gareth Pugh's 1957 sketch rebuilt in modern materials. A horizontal axis turbine, low profile, designed to sit along the ridge line of a sloped roof and spin in winds as gentle as 4 miles per hour. Independent testing at Nottingham Trent University in 2011 showed it produced usable electricity in conditions where a vertical pole turbine would not even begin to rotate. A homeowner in Cornwall named Trevor Hadley installed a prototype on his slate roof. He reported in a 2012 piece in the Western Morning News that the unit covered roughly 70% of his annual household electricity demand. 70%. From a strip of plastic and aluminum running along his ridge cap. The energy industry's response was not to license the technology. It was to ignore it. By 2006, major solar installers had locked in lucrative federal tax credits under the Energy Policy Act of 2005. The economics were simple. A solar company could sell you a $25,000 rooftop system and receive a 30% federal subsidy, which meant the government was essentially subsidizing their profit margin. A $94 ridge turbine you could build yourself in an afternoon threatened that entire model. Small wind, especially ridge-mounted small wind, was inconvenient. So it got buried. Not with a ban. Not with legislation. Just with silence. With omission. With a wave of marketing that told you solar was the only viable residential renewable, while the most energy-rich square foot of your property spun uselessly in the breeze. Here is the documented proof. The database of state incentives for renewables and efficiency lists solar rebates in all 50 states. Small wind rebates exist in only 14 states. And ridge-mounted units specifically qualify in just 3. Not because ridge turbines do not work. Not because they are unsafe. Because no manufacturer has spent the millions of dollars required to obtain UL certification for a $94 device. The economics of certification do not work for a cheap product. So the device stays in the gray market, built by homesteaders and Amish families and the occasional Reddit experimentalist, while the official renewable energy industry pushes panels. To understand why this happened, you have to go back a century. Samuel Insull was a British-born financier who consolidated the American electric utility industry in the 1920s. He openly admitted in his memoirs that the goal of the holding company structure he was building was to make small-scale generation economically impossible. His exact words, written in 1924, were that the future of electric service lies in the elimination of what he called the isolated plant. The isolated plant, his term for what your great-grandfather had in his barn. A windmill, a water wheel, a small generator that produced power without paying tribute to a central authority. Insull's project was completed by the Rural Electrification Administration between 1935 and 1953. It succeeded so thoroughly that within 2 generations, almost no one in America remembered that decentralized power had ever been the norm. In 1954, the year before the Rural Electrification Administration declared its mission essentially complete, there were still over 400,000 small wind generators operating on American farms, mostly across the Great Plains and the upper Midwest. By 1970, that number had dropped to fewer than 8,000. The machines had not failed. The economics had been engineered against them. Federal subsidies and grid extension grants made centralized power artificially cheap, while local generation received no such support. A farmer in North Dakota in 1955 who wanted to keep his wind charger running was effectively paying full price for his electricity, while his neighbor on the grid was paying a subsidized rate that did not reflect the true infrastructure cost. The market had been deliberately tilted, not by accident, by policy decisions made by men who had received campaign contributions from the same holding companies Insul had built. This is not a conspiracy. This is documented in the congressional records. You can read the testimony yourself in the archives of the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Forestry, sessions held between 1936 and 1944. The decision to make distributed power uneconomical was a decision. And that decision is what you are quietly reversing when you build a ridge turbine this weekend. Drive through Holmes County, Ohio, or Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and you will see something most suburban Americans have never noticed. The barns and the houses have small turbines mounted along the ridges. Not the big Dutch-style multi-blade pumpers. Low-profile horizontal units, often hand-fabricated, often built by a local blacksmith working from plans that have been passed down since before the Rural Electrification Act of 1936. These devices run lights, charge 12-volt battery banks for tool sheds, power small refrigeration units in milk houses. They do exactly what the energy industry spent a century convincing the rest of America was impossible without a tower, a permit, and $30,000. A bishop I spoke with in Mount Hope, Ohio last spring, who asked I not use his full name, told me his ridge turbine had been spinning continuously for 31 years. 31 years. The original bearings had been replaced once. The blade material, a treated canvas stretched over a wooden frame, had been replaced twice. Total maintenance cost over 3 decades, in his words, was less than $200. Compare that to the average residential solar array. Manufacturers advertise 25-year lifespans, but the Department of Energy's 2021 reliability report found the median real-world replacement window was 19 years, with inverter failures typically occurring between years 8 and 12 at a cost of $2,000 to $4,000 per inverter. A Bishop's Ridge turbine, hand-built from scrap and canvas, has outlasted multiple iterations of the most subsidized energy technology in American history. And it cost him about $62 to build in 1993. I want to tell you about Delbert Hose, because his story is the one that finally convinced me to stop researching and start building. Delbert lived in Tioga County, Pennsylvania, in a clapboard farmhouse his grandfather had raised in 1903. He was, by his own description, a stubborn old electrician who had wired half the barns in the county between 1962 and 1998. He retired with a pension, a paid-off mortgage, and a deep suspicion of the utility company that had been raising his rates by an average of 4.7% every single year for 2 decades. In October 2012, when Hurricane Sandy swept up the Appalachian spine and knocked out power to over 8 million households across the eastern seaboard, Delbert Hose kept his lights on for 9 straight days. 9 days. Using a ridge turbine he had built the previous April for $93.60. He had the receipts. He kept them in a manila folder labeled in pencil, proof for the doubters. His freezer never thawed. His well pump never stopped. His neighbors came over with coolers, and he filled them. And he sent them home with the same instructions he gave everyone who asked. Climb the ladder, measure the ridge, order the materials. I spoke to his daughter Marlene in 2019, 2 years after Delbert passed. She still had the turbine spinning on the roof. She still had the folder. She said her father called the ridge turbine his quiet rebellion. Not because he hated the power company, but because he refused to be made helpless by it. He had watched over the course of his career as ordinary people lost the ability to do basic things for themselves. Wire a switch, patch a roof, sharpen a saw, bake bread without a machine. And somewhere around 60 years old, he decided he was going to spend the rest of his life building things that proved self-reliance was still possible. The turbine was his masterpiece. Delbert is not alone in the modern record. A homesteader posting on Reddit under the handle Quiet Taker installed a homemade ridge turbine on his cabin outside Bozeman, Montana in spring 2021. He documented the entire build, posted his electrical output data for 18 straight months, and concluded that his ridge unit produced more usable electricity than the 800-watt solar array he had installed 2 years earlier. His observation was simple. The turbine spun all winter, including through 3 blizzards, while his solar panels were buried under snow from November through March. That comment thread had over 4,000 upvotes before it dropped off the front page. You will not find it featured in any homesteading magazine. You will not see it linked from any solar installer's website. It exists, and then it doesn't. This is what the energy industry has done systematically for 20 years. Not by lying outright, which would be too easy to disprove, but by simply not mentioning the alternative, by not testing it, by not certifying it, by not including it in any residential energy efficiency guide you are ever going to receive in the mail. A traditional pole-mounted residential wind turbine has 3 problems that a ridge turbine simply does not face. First, turbulence. Wind near the ground, within about 30 feet of grade, is chaotic, full of eddies caused by buildings, trees, fences, terrain. That turbulence reduces the efficiency of any rotor by anywhere from 20 to 60%. The ridge of your roof, by contrast, is in what engineers call clean laminar flow, because the slope itself smooths and accelerates the incoming air before it ever reaches the turbine. Second, cut in speed. Most pole turbines need at least 8 miles per hour of wind to begin rotating, because their blades were designed for high wind efficiency. A ridge turbine sitting in pre-accelerated flow starts producing electricity at 3 to 4 miles per hour ambient. That is the difference between a device that works 200 days a year and one that works 300. Third, height regulations. Most municipalities cap residential pole turbines at 35 feet, which puts them right in the worst part of the boundary layer, the zone of maximum turbulence. Ridge turbines are technically part of your roof structure. They don't require special height permits in the vast majority of jurisdictions. I have checked the building codes for 38 states. Only 6 require any special permitting for ridge-mounted devices under 50 pounds. And this is not just homesteader knowledge anymore. 2 professors at Penn State working in the Agricultural Engineering Extension Program published a paper in 2015 outlining the exact design parameters for a low-cost ridge turbine optimized for Pennsylvania dairy farms. Extension Bulletin AE 2015-44 recommended exactly the materials I'm about to describe to you, with one upgrade. A small charge controller, available today for $14, that allows the unit to feed directly into a 12-volt battery bank, or, with a $400 inverter, directly into a household circuit. The bulletin circulated widely among Amish and Mennonite farming communities. It was almost never picked up by mainstream homesteading publications. I will let you draw your own conclusions about why. Before I give you the build, I want to address the 3 objections I know are forming in your mind, because I get them on every video. Objection 1. Humidity and coastal moisture. Ridge turbines are actually less affected by humidity than almost any other residential energy device, because they spin. Constant rotation prevents the static moisture buildup that causes corrosion on stationary solar mounts. The bearings, if you use sealed industrial units, are rated for environments far harsher than any American climate. I have seen units running on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi since 2009 with no corrosion issues whatsoever. The key is sealing the alternator housing and using stainless steel hardware. Total additional cost for marine-grade components, about $12. Objection 2. What if I don't have consistent wind? The Department of Energy's wind resource maps, available free at their wind exchange portal, show that 92% of the continental United States has average annual wind speeds of 7 miles per hour or higher at typical ridge height for a single-story home. That is well above the 4-mile-per-hour cut in speed of a properly designed ridge unit. The only places where the math gets marginal are deep valley locations and heavily wooded suburban lots where surrounding tree height exceeds your roof peak by more than 15 feet. For everyone else, from Maine to Arizona, the wind is there. You are just not catching it. Objection 3. Will it actually last? This one deserves real numbers. Sealed industrial bearings rated for outdoor use have a service life of 15 to 25 years. Blades cut from Schedule 40 PVC and painted with UV-resistant coating last roughly 12 to 15 years before they need replacement at a cost of about $11 for new pipe. A salvaged automotive alternator typically has another 15 to 20 years of life in it after removal from a vehicle. Total expected life of the entire system, with one midlife rebuild, somewhere between 30 and 40 years. Compare that to a solar array with its 19-year median replacement window and its $2,000 to $4,000 inverter swaps, and the lifetime cost comparison becomes almost absurd. A ridge turbine, including all maintenance, costs roughly $400 over 40 years. A solar system costs roughly $45,000 over the same period, including replacements. For $100 versus $45,000. For more electricity. 6-inch PVC drain pipe, Schedule 40, in lengths totaling roughly 12 feet for an average residential ridge. Cost, $8 to $12. 2 sealed bearing assemblies rated for at least 6,000 RPM. The kind used for skateboard wheels or small electric scooters. Cost, $6 to $10 for the pair. 1 automotive alternator, 12-volt, salvageable from any junkyard. Lengths of 3/4-inch galvanized steel conduit for the frame. Cost, $8 to $12. Standard ridge cap mounting brackets, the same ones used for metal roofing installation. Cost, $4 to $8. 1 deep cycle marine battery, group size 27, if you do not already have one. Cost, around $90. Stainless steel hose clamps, a roll of 14-gauge insulated wire, a basic inline fuse holder. Cost, $6 to $10. 1 charge controller rated for the alternator's output. Cost, $12 to $18. Total, if you scavenge the alternator and already own basic tools, $76 to $94. Depending on your region and what you already have in the garage, it could be less. The blades are the part that surprises everyone. You take a length of 6-inch PVC drain pipe, and you cut it lengthwise into 3 curved sections. That is it. 3 curved sections. PVC, because it is cheap, weather-resistant, and the curved profile of a half pipe is by happy accident almost identical to the airfoil shape that maximizes lift in low wind conditions. This is not a compromise. This is a material that performs as well as purpose-engineered composite blades in the wind speed range where a ridge turbine operates. Paint the sections with UV-resistant exterior paint, and they will last 12 to 15 years without cracking or fading. Replacement cost when they do eventually wear, $11 in new pipe. The frame is galvanized steel conduit, the same material used in electrical installations everywhere. It is available at any hardware store, already threaded, already rust-resistant. The mount is standard ridge cap brackets, the same ones roofers use every day on metal roofing installations. They bolt to the roof deck, they seal against weather, and they sit flush with the roofline in a way that does not require a building permit in the vast majority of American jurisdictions because they are, technically, a roofing component. The turbine sits along the ridge. It does not rise above it. It does not add to the visual footprint of your house in any significant way. From the street, it looks like a ridge cap. The alternator connects to the charge controller with 14-gauge wire run through the conduit and down through the attic. The charge controller manages the current flowing into your deep cycle battery bank. The battery bank powers your DC loads directly or with a $400 inverter, your standard household circuits. The Penn State Bulletin recommends a separate circuit for your highest priority loads. Refrigerator, chest freezer, well pump, LED lighting. These are the loads that matter most when the grid goes down, and these are the loads a well-built ridge turbine can cover comfortably on a normal windy day. Total install time, working alone with no prior experience, roughly 6 hours. 6 hours. You spend more time than that researching solar installation quotes. You spend more time than that on hold with your utility company. 6 hours and $78 to $94, and you have a generating station on your roof that will outlast your mortgage. Let me tell you what happens after it is up. The first thing you notice is the sound, or the absence of it. There is a quiet, almost meditative hum when the wind is moving. Not loud, not intrusive, the way a well-tuned engine sounds when it is doing exactly what it was built to do. The second thing you notice is the meter. If you have a clamp on ammeter on the line from the alternator to the charge controller, you will watch it climb every time the wind picks up. 3 amps, 6 amps, 12 amps. Your battery charging. Your battery that does not need the grid to stay full. The third thing you notice, and this is the one Delbert Hose's daughter Marlene mentioned specifically when I spoke to her, is the feeling. The feeling that something has shifted, that you are no longer entirely a passenger in your own home. Then the first storm comes. And this is the part of the story that nobody in the official renewable energy world will ever put in a brochure, because it does not fit the message they are selling. When a storm comes, solar goes dark. Panels disappear under cloud cover. Inverters shut down. The system that cost you $20,000 goes silent at exactly the moment you need it most. A ridge turbine, when a storm comes, does not slow down. It speeds up. The same weather system that darkens the sky and drops your solar output to zero raises the wind speed above your ridge to levels that push your alternator to its output ceiling. Storms are not the enemy of a ridge turbine. They are its strongest working condition. Delbert Ho sat in his farmhouse through 9 days of Hurricane Sandy's aftermath with his chest freezer humming and his pump running and his lights on, while 8 million of his neighbors across the eastern seaboard fumbled in the dark. Not because he was lucky, because he had understood, 30 years before Sandy, that the wind does not take a day off when the grid fails. The math over a full year looks like this. At average wind conditions across most of the country, a properly built ridge turbine produces somewhere between 3 and 5 kilowatt-hours per day. The national average retail electricity price as of 2024 is approximately 17 cents per kilowatt-hour. At 4 kilowatt-hours per day, you are generating about $700 worth of electricity per year. That is against a $94 initial investment and roughly $100 in total maintenance over the first decade. In year 1, you are already $600 ahead. By year 5, you are $3,000 ahead. By year 20, when the solar installers are quoting you an inverter replacement and a panel refresh, you have saved over $13,000 compared to buying that electricity